For listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, and good evening, and I should add, almost Merry Christmas. For the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 14th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Front page. Lead article written by Daniel Michaels, a regular contributor to the review. It's entitled Local Spies with Lethal Gear. How Israel and Ukraine reinvented covert action. A potent new fusion of old-style human spycraft with cutting-edge technology is having a big impact on high-stakes conflicts. When Israel launched its 12-day attack on Iran in June, a network of secret agents on the ground proved critical in crippling Tehran's defenses. Some of the most secret operatives weren't professional spies or commandos in camouflage. They were ordinary locals empowered by Israeli high-tech gadgetry. Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, had spent years identifying and cultivating inside Iran a silent force, including victims of Iranian repression, ethnic minorities sidelined by regime policies, and people from Afghanistan and other neighboring countries who can live and work openly in Iran. At secret camps outside Iran, Israel trained its recruits to operate sophisticated, automated, and remotely controlled equipment, according to people familiar with the operation. Then, Mossad instructed them to go about their daily routines across Iran as part of what it calls a drawer operation, one that sits quietly in reserve until the drawer needs to be opened. That day was June 13th, when the strategically located agents used rockets, drones, and other weapons smuggled into Iran to destroy nearby air defense systems and missile launchers, according to Israeli statements and people familiar with the operation. Weeks earlier, Kiev had used a similar playbook to attack Russia's strategic bomber fleet with explosive drones. Ukraine's real-life version of James Bond, Artem Tayamayvelf, is a bearded DJ who posted on SoundCloud under the name of Tim and had worked at his father's Russian flour mill. Taimyvelf and his wife, a tattoo artist, secretly prepared Operation Spiderweb from inside a warehouse they rented near a Russian state security office, according to Russian and Ukrainian officials. Like Israel's agents in Iran, Taimyvelf and his wife are ordinary people who easily blended into Russian society, but they employed advanced technology supplied by their spy master handlers back in Kiev. Over the past year, Ukraine, and Israel have displayed a potent new fusion of old-style human spycraft with cutting-edge gear, giving clandestine action and outsized impacts on high-stakes conflicts. The transformation is made possible by increasingly compact electronics, batteries, and explosives. Miniaturization, especially of power supplies, lets spy agencies equip field agents with capabilities unimaginable a few years ago. Until recently, achieving big impact at close range is in unfriendly territory generally required putting elite career operatives directly in harm's way. Now, with the advent of powerful remote or autonomous devices, the people deploying them don't need to be seasoned professionals. Amateurs with minimal training can execute critical elements within large missions, such as planting devices or operating them near hard-to-reach targets. Being local, they can remain hidden or escape before an attack. The lone 007 operator is not what we're looking for now, said Aaron Lerman, former top official in Israel's National Security Council and a senior military intelligence official. Now, people are at the tip of a very complex operation. Spy agencies have long made innovative use of technology, including devices more fanciful than those James Bond gets from Q, his gadgetary wizard. Technology is also wielded against spies, and that threat is precisely why intelligence organizations are now seeking local agents from outside their ranks. Pervasive surveillance, electronic tracking, and biometric profiling, altogether known as digital dust, have gutted traditional undercover operations. The U.S. discovered that in 2003, when a team of almost 24 agents who had abducted an Egyptian cleric in Italy for secret interrogation was ousted by analysis of their local cell phone records. Mossad was similarly upended by technology in 2010, when an entire team sent to assassinate a Palestinian official in Dubai was exposed by security cameras. Local police published stills from the footage and photos of the agents from their forged passports blowing their cover. The fiasco followed a botched attempt by Mossad agents in 1997 to assassinate a Palestinian leader in Jordan that sparked a diplomatic crisis and demonstrated limits to Israeli operatives' ability to act abroad. Mossad's two failures shocked an organization accustomed to operating with impunity. Its agents in 1960 had kidnapped Nazi Adolf Eichmann in Argentina and spirited him back to Israel for trial. After Palestinian terrorists killed 11 Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics in Munich, Mossad agents spent years crossing the globe to hunt down and kill the assailants. Spy agencies saw profound implications in the recent debacles. far beyond public humiliation. Traditional spy tools and methods, known in the field as tradecraft, suddenly seemed unusable. Forged passports became evidence of crimes. Cell phone network data from secret calls offered a trail of breadcrumbs for investigators. Facial recognition software and DNA analysis made wigs and disguises laughable. The impact of biometrics was enormous, said Alan Cantor, an Israeli investor who specializes in security technology. Not long ago, a few documents could establish a fictitious identity. In a digitized world where almost everyone has some degree of online presence, lacking an internet persona becomes suspicious, Cantor noted. Former Israeli intelligence officials say they realized that rather than sending their own people on foreign missions, they needed to find locals who would execute critical elements on Israelis' behalf. While spy agencies have long relied on local agents for tasks that insiders can accomplish best, like unlocking doors, cracking safes, and planting bugs, the new agents would do more than assist. And unlike sleeper agents that Moscow sent to the West during the Cold War and after, who led deep cover lives for years awaiting instructions that might never arrive, Israel's operatives were trained for specific missions, former officials say. Israel tapped its network in 2018 to help steal Iran's nuclear archives and spirit them out of the country. Israeli officials said that the stash included around 50,000 printed pages and 183 computer disks. Mossad in 2020 enlisted agents inside Iran to help position a robotic machine gun hidden in the back of a parked pickup truck along the commute of Iran's top nuclear scientist. When remote operators hundreds of miles away shot Mohsen Farzadeh, Israel's local agents were already far from the scene, according to people familiar with the operation. This June, Israel's local operatives destroyed Iranian air defenses and spotted high-value targets before and during the attacks, according to former Israeli intelligence officials familiar with the operation. What you have is a sort of an extension arm, which gives you the best of both worlds, said Ayal Serkon, former senior Israeli intelligence official. It allows you to operate at a distance, but gives you deniability and gives your agents survivability. New covert technologies don't just empower local agents hiding in plain sight. Israeli intelligence agents last year remotely detonated explosives hidden in papers and walkie-talkies used by members of Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah across Lebanon, inflicting severe damage on the group and killing at least 12 people. The plot behind sneaking the lethal devices into enemy hands was more of a classic covert operation carried out by intelligence professionals rather than amateurs, according to people familiar with the project. Other spy agencies have learned from Israel's new approach, using digital communications and imaging technology in cell phones and drones to blur the lines between intelligence gathering and covert activities. Political leaders are increasingly asking intelligence services not only to collect information, but also to affect the situation on the ground, said a European intelligence official. It's increasingly important to have a special forces unit inside your intelligence agency. Clandestine action, the stuff of thrillers and Hollywood hits, has traditionally served a less colorful policy purpose, somewhere between diplomacy and war. The motto of the Central Intelligence Agency's Covert Operations Divisions, the Special Activities Center, is Tertia Optio, or third option, neither combat nor negotiation. Flashing fangs in this way can let one side display its abilities to an adversary, such as the harm it can inflict or how deeply it can penetrate a leadership, using acts that fall short of outright war. Covert actions can actually support diplomacy by showing an enemy that armed conflict would fail and paradoxically lead to de-escalation, say practitioners. You use a combination of covert activity and airstrikes when you don't want to send any ground forces, said Seth Jones, who previously worked in U.S. Special Operations Command and now runs the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies at a Washington think tank. They generally are not going to win you a war, but they can be effective in many ways. And that's what happened in 2007, after Israel spotted an undisclosed facility in Syria that intelligence analysts believe housed an illicit nuclear program. Israel, the leaders, opted to destroy it with a secret airstrike that they only acknowledged more than a decade later. Syria, unable to resume a program it had conducted in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, only said at the time that it had thwarted an Israeli airstrike. It staged no direct retaliation. No country has applied new technology and Israel's lessons more actively than the Ukraine, which is fighting now for its existence and has limited capacity to strike deep inside Russia. Following Moscow's large-scale invasion in 2022, Kiev made innovative use of commercially available drones for reconnaissance, targeting and dropping improvised explosives. Ukrainian troops tapped crowdsourced intelligence on Russian troop positions, aggregated to software similar to ride-sharing apps. A turning point in Kiev's covert operations came after Russian forces in March of 2022 massacred civilians in Bucha, a quiet commuter town outside Kiev. Ukrainian intelligence officials told their Western counterparts they would replicate Israel's reprisal for the Munich Olympic murders, according to people in the meeting. Ukraine intensified purges of holdover Russian sympathizers. from its SBU of intelligence agency and set out to professionalize on the model of Mossad. Outgunned by Russia in weaponry, Kiev ruthlessly exploited its few advantages available for covert action. Its agents proved adept at getting near their targets because most Ukrainians speak Russian, and many have Russian passports, relatives, or homes, allowing them to blend into Russian society. Rampant corruption in Russia also means that information and access can often be bought. Ukraine also blurred lines on the battlefield. A Ukrainian intelligence officer with the call sign Paragraph said last year she created a fake account on a Russian dating app, used AI-generated photos, and connected with Russian soldiers, sending carefully selected responses generated by ChatGPT. She tempted the soldiers to share photos of themselves. Paragraph colleagues then used details in the photos to pinpoint the soldiers' location and called in airstrikes. As war dragged on, SBU agents inside Russia staged increasingly daring attacks, often abetted by Russians unaware of their role. SBU operators assassinated a general in Moscow using a bomb hidden in a scooter, and killed a propagandist in St. Petersburg with an exploding statuette presented by an unwitting Russian woman at a public event. The strikes mixed detailed human intelligence with advanced remote technologies and allowed many of Ukraine's agents to evade capture. Russia has also employed local agents inside Ukraine and Western Europe. Dutch authorities in September, acting on information from the country's military intelligence and security service, arrested 3 17-year-old Dutch men for allegedly receiving payment from a hacker group linked to the Russian government. The 3 received equipment to map and hack Wi-Fi systems at official buildings, potentially for digital espionage and cyber attacks, according to the Dutch public prosecutor. A Kremlin spokesman rejected the allegations as groundless. A big distinction, say intelligence specialists, is that the Russia's local agents generally work for pay, and many don't know that they are working for Moscow. Israel and Ukraine, in contrast, have developed networks of agents who act out of conviction. Operation Spiderweb at Tavanov was one of those agents. A dual Ukraine-Russian citizen, he had worked over recent years in the Russian industrial city of Chelyabinsk, about 900 miles east of Moscow. Timorov's wife, Katerina, also a dual citizen, moved to Chelyabinsk with him in 2018. There, she ran a tattoo parlor that locals said stayed open late in the evening, Russian state media reported. The couple's legitimate public life allowed them to operate so openly that when Timorov last year set up a road freight business for the operation, he was able to rent a warehouse near the local field office of Russia's FSB State Security Service. Technology followed or allowed Ukraine to run the operation from afar. But it also presented engineering challenges because even digital connections need time to cover distance. The drones would be attacking targets up to 3,000 miles away from their pilots, so video signals would lag slightly, potentially causing image delays known as latency that could botch the strikes. Ukrainian planners carefully constructed software and the communications channels to minimize latency, according to people involved in the work. Israel took similar measures with the remote machine gun it used to kill Iranian nuclear scientist Farizadeh in 2020, according to a person familiar with the attack. Ukraine's high-tech approach in spiderweb allowed it not just to hit distant targets, but to protect its agents. The Timonovs left Russia days before the strikes. Ukrainian officials say the couple is now in a secure location. You're reading, or pardon me, you are not reading, you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review. Where? On the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. That's where. We're going to change direction now. In other words, look another way. And in looking, there is an intriguing title that should catch our attention. The title is The Wisdom of Keith Richards at 82. There's another subtitle to that, Solving the Mystery of the Guitarist's Longevity May Be Our Best Hope of Aging Gracefully. In America, the average man can expect to live 75.8 years. Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts had gone 5 years past that and was still playing for audiences shortly before he died in 2021. Stones founder Brian Jones died young in his swimming pool. But several of the band's other iconic members, from Ronnie Wood, 78, to Bill Wyman, 89, have won the battle with the actuarial tables. Mick Jagger, the demonic frontman, was barely slowed by the replacement of his aortic valve in 2019. An octogenarian, Mick can still be seen dancing on the ashes of Western civilization. And yet, for some reason, it is the band's rhythm guitarist who personifies immortality. As the bumper sticker has it, think of the world we'll be leaving, Keith Richards. How this riff-drunk ragamuffin, who turned 82 on December 18th, not only survived, but stayed relevant, is a mystery, a puzzle wrapped inside a guitar string. Solving it may be the best way, the best hope the rest of us have of aging gracefully. I date my life with Keith to the spring of 1982. when in the finale of the Central School Talent Show in Glencoe, Illinois, I played the part of the guitarist in the Stones cover band that brought down the house with Jumpin' Jack Flash. The experience taught me not only about rock and roll and the lure of stardom, but about the vicissitudes of the powers that be, a.k.a. the man, Vice Principal Armour, who handed me a 3-day suspension for the trip I'd made into the seats during the solo, for the cigarette I lit, and for how I tossed it into the crowd, the orange tip shedding sparks as it turned over and over. It was while preparing for the show that I really learned about Keith, about his legendary 1961 meeting with Yeager at the train station in Dartford, the English town where they both grew up, about their mutual love for the Chicago blues. Yeager was carrying a stack of albums from Chess Records. About the Stones' apprenticeship in the basement clubs and bars around London. About the first rush of fame, and how Keith shut himself off from it behind a wall made of heroin. It was living through the chaos and tragedies of the 60s and 70s, the river of opioids, the demise of Janis, Jimmy, Jim, and the rest, that gave him that vampiric aura, as the roadie puts it in Wayne's World 2. Keith cannot be killed by conventional weapons. Looking at a picture of young Keith, gap-toothed and geeky, beside old Keith, as gnarled as Yoda, is a lesson in the nature of time, in what the years can do. It's the damage that makes him seem immortal, not just what he lived through, but how he survived. It's what Hemingway called grace under pressure, the ability to maintain a steady inner atmosphere even when the whip comes down. In his memoir, Life, Keith describes writing Angie in a Swiss sanitarium after narrowly surviving yet another overdose. It's Keith squeezing his life like a press, turning a brush with death into maybe the most beautiful ballad in rock and roll that gives us hope. Keith says he doesn't know where the song comes from. Great songs write themselves, he explains, in life. You're just being led by the nose or the ears. The skill is not to interfere with it too much. But I think I do know. It's the confrontation between a sensibility and the abyss. Not just touching the edge, but coming away with a song that makes a person seem everlasting. To me, the lesson is simple. If you keep going long enough, if you keep playing, if you stay in the game, if you get up just one more time, then you've been knocked down. People will ascribe to you a quality that is indistinguishable from wisdom. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's an article by Bertrand Benoit, who is the Germany bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal. It's entitled, "Why I Grieve America's Retreat from Europe." My hometown of Vichy has a dark history. From 1940 to 1944, the pretty spa town in the center of France was home to the collaborationist regime of Marshal Philippe Pétain, which helped round up Jews for the Nazi occupiers. But a profound reversal occurred in Vichy after the war. By the time I was a child there in the 1980s, the place was bathed in transatlantic mythology and affection for the United States, the great liberator. There was a Boulevard des États-Unis and a Boulevard Kennedy. There was a Rue de President Wilson, a Rue President Roosevelt, and a pedestrian avenue in the name of General Dwight Eisenhower. In school, we were taught that the Statue of Liberty had been cast in Paris, that the Marquis de Lafayette had been a U.S. commander in the American Revolutionary War, and that St. Louis in Missouri was named after a 13th century French king. Most all, in my case, there was the personal connection between stretching across the Atlantic, established during the war when many of my family's elders fought for Charles de Gaulle's Free French. My great-grandfather was a port officer in Algiers, spying for the Allies. When they finally landed, my grandmother later recalled, he stormed into the kitchen, hanged on the table shouting, "The Americans are here. The Americans are here." Today, to my dismay, and that of millions of other Europeans, it's no longer clear that the Americans are here. It is hard to overstate the shock that has spread across the continent over the past year, as the U.S. under President Trump has turned against Europe, seemingly rejecting a centuries-old heritage. The estrangement has come in stages. It started in February with Vice President Vance and his speech at the Munich Security Conference, where he blasted European governments for their policies on speech and immigration. Then in April, President Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs, which targeted the European Union as a bad actor. More recently, in a leaked 28-point peace plan for Ukraine, the Trump administration endorsed long-standing Russian positions and described the U.S. as a mediator between Moscow and NATO, of which the U.S. is the largest member. And just this month, in the latest U.S. national security strategy operation, in one of their documents describing the threats facing the U.S. and its foreign policy objectives, the administration said that Europe was ruled by illegitimate and repressive governments, whose policies could bring about the continent's civilization erasure. The alarm in Europe is real. In France, just 36% of people now see the U.S. positively, down from 46% a year ago. According to a recent Pew Research Center survey, and in another survey last month, 73% of Germans said that German-U.S. relationships were bad, up from just 22% last year. Many Europeans, both voters and their governments, now feel they're on their own. And the sense of abandonment can feel personal. It's difficult not to conclude that Europeans are simply more emotionally invested than Americans in the relationship. The ties trace back most obviously to shared struggles. That is certainly the case with my family. After France fell to the Nazis in the 1940s, my late maternal grandfather, Paul Bassett, abandoned his law studies to join his older brother Gabriel and Louis in French North Africa. The three joined de Gaulle's forces following the U.S. and British landing there in 1942. They fought for the liberation of Italy, where Louis was hit by shrapnel and died in early 1944. And the surviving brothers carried on, wearing, Paul later recalled, American uniforms with French patches sewed on. Later that year in Alsace, Paul, then a major, met my grandmother, Gabriel Gonon, who had joined de Gaulle's troops as an ambulance driver in 1942 in Algeria. It was her father who was the spy. For the half-century that followed during the Cold War, the Soviet Union replaced Germany as the villain, and there was no question Americans were the good guys. I recall one day at school when a friend suggested things might be more complicated in the superpower rivalry. The teacher bristled with anger, moistening her eyes. Just think of where you would prefer to live. I knew where I wanted to live. As a postgrad student in 1994, I was granted my childhood wish of a year in New York. Being of the West was in my bones, unquestionable. I have only ever participated in one demonstration, and it was on the day after 9/11, when I joined in a huge crowd in a silent march through Frankfurt, my home at the time. There are many flavors of transatlanticism. The UK is the closest ally, U.S. ally in Europe. France is the oldest. Its Republican institutions, humanist constitution, and all-powerful president have much in common with America's. German migrants shaped the U.S., and the U.S. returned the favor in the 1950s by shaping many of the post-war Germany's new institutions. When I moved to Western Germany in the late 1990s, later to become a German citizen, I was struck by how American it felt. Most Europeans see transatlanticism as something like an edifice with a wooden facade built over brick walls sitting on a granite foundation. The facade represents common interests, transient and constantly remodeled. The bricks are the founding myths: victory over Nazism, the haunting U.S. military cemetery in Normandy, Vichy's street names. The foundation, the immutable part, or so one thought. Shared values, freedom, democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and for members of NATO, a promise of mutual military support. Foreign policy realists focus on interests and tend to dismiss shared values and myths. But to me, principles and shared sacrifices explain the irresistible gravitational force of the West. Being part of it felt not just good, but right, aligned with the progress of history. One prominent Vichyite who had thought a lot about the appeal and demise of transatlanticism is Claude Malhuart, who served as the city's mayor for 28 years and is now a member of the French Senate. A centrist with conservative leanings on the economy and foreign policy, he became a social media celebrity last March when he delivered an impassioned 8-minute speech in the Senate's gilded chamber. He compared the second Trump administration as the court of Nero, warning that the president was undermining the Western alliance. There is really no point to being his ally, because he won't protect you. He will hit you with bigger tariffs than his enemies. He will threaten to steal your territory, and he will support the dictatorships that are invading you. When I interviewed him this week, he said that his outlook has changed. He thought the leaked Ukraine plan and the new national security strategy reflected beliefs of a small group around the president, not that of most Americans. This is not Europe versus America, he said. The pendulum may yet swing back. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review. On the dial, popularly known as the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Sky Gingell, born 1963, died 2025. After kicking heroin, she became a well-known chef. She was the Australian-born restaurateur, favored local ingredients, and made peach and tomato ice cream. Peach and tomato? My goodness. She had a great quote, though. Great personal quote. It's my greatest achievement that I got clean. Thomas O. Hicks, born 1946, died 2025. A private equity investor who learned resilience from loss on the gridiron. The one-time football player from Texas toughened his way through a career in finance that swung from big wins to major flops. As a high school football player in Port Arthur, Texas in the early 1960s, Thomas O. Hicks dropped a pass in a playoff game. His coach kicked him in the shins. Football, he later told his son Tommy, made him tougher and more resilient. That helped later in life when the professional sports business dealt him the financial equivalent of a kick in the chins. Buying and selling companies, including the makers of 7-Up, Dr. Pepper, and Bumblebee Tuna, earned Hicks enough money to purchase both the Dallas Star hockey team and the Texas Rangers baseball franchise in the 1990s. And he acquired a half share in England's Liverpool Football Club in 2007. He had the thrill of hoisting the Stanley Cup when the Stars won the Pro Hockey Championship in 1999. The Rangers were the talk of baseball in 2000 when Hicks signed a superstar infielder, Alex Rodriguez, to a 10-year, $252 million contract. But the Rodriguez contract failed to pull the Rangers out of last place, and A-Rod was traded to the Yankees in 2004. But the Rangers and Stars ended up in bankruptcy proceedings. The Rangers were sold through an auction in 2010 and the Stars in 2011. Meanwhile, English soccer fans were enraged when Liverpool started losing. Debts piled up and the American owner didn't deliver swiftly on promises of a new stadium. Protesters wore scarves bearing a "Thanks, but no Yanks" slogan. Amid disputes between the owners, they sold Liverpool in 2010. Hicks died December 6th at his home in Dallas. He was 79 and had been under treatment for throat cancer. Hicks' experience in sports was emblematic. Speak right, get your tongue straight there, swans. Was emblematic of his career in business. During more than 4 decades as a private equity investor, he swung from gushers of profits to sinkholes of red ink. After every flop, he'd bounce back and move onward. Thomas Ollis Hicks, the second of 4 sons, was born February 7th, 1946, and grew up in Dallas and Port Arthur. Hicks earned an MBA at the University of Southern California in 1970, and after gaining experience in venture capital and investment banking, he began pursuing deals on his own or with partners and surviving crushing losses in some oil investments. In 1984, he and Robert Haas founded the Dallas-based equity firm Hicks and Haas. Haas died in 2021. Among other deals, the firm bought stakes in the makers of Dr. Pepper and 7-Up, and sold shares in the combined company for a big profit. In 1989, Hicks and Haas split up. Hicks doubled down on bigger deals in the 1990s as head of private equity firm Hicks, Muse, Tate, and First. That firm scored with investments in radio stations and food brands, including Swanson frozen dinners and Vlasic pickles, but had losses on movie theaters, Argentine ventures, and dot-com disasters. In 1999, Hicks told the Dallas Morning News, "My biggest challenge in life is that I'm totally overextended." 6 years later, after a particularly rough streak, he gave up his role as chairman of Hicks Muse and devoted himself to pursuing smaller investments with his sons. "I've had all the publicity I want to have," he said. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 14th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review. We read from the Wall Street Journal Review every Thursday at 7 p.m. That's where we found you tonight. Next week, we'll find you there too. Your reader has been Don Swans. And I want to thank you for listening. And not only thank you for listening, but considering where we're at in the time of things, for those who care, let me say, Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening and being with us this evening. It's been my pleasure. I hope I can continue for you. God bless.
Coming up next to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the New York Times. Following that, at 9 o'clock, we have Fortune Magazine, and at 10 o'clock, we have episode number 9 of Homestand by Will Bardenhopper. Warper. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 14227. Any questions on Dash's tapes for radio reading? Call us at 716-821-5555, and thanks for caring. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,